Why don't you turn to Mark chapter 9? Either turn to it or turn it on your phone. And we're going to be continuing our series in the Gospel of Mark as we have been exploring Jesus introduced to us as the Messiah and the Son of God. And we have spent time going through the Gospel of Mark looking at that he is the one who brings God's promised kingdom to earth, God's saving project. He is the one who accomplishes that. And we've recently been preaching through this turning point in the Gospel of Mark with Peter's confession of Jesus as Messiah. And then last week, Mike spoke about the transfiguration. And we reflected on that in our Connect groups during the week. And there's a couple of things I want to point out just as a refresher to lead us into this morning and what we're going to be talking about. And so last week, Mike showed how Jesus was transformed, that his glory shone through his face, shone through his clothes, and that we were seeing his glory. We were seeing the glory of God, the glory that Moses had saw in the wilderness, the glory that Elijah encountered on top of the mountain. That the glory, the deity of Jesus is shining through his incarnate, his flesh. At Jesus' baptism, the Spirit comes down upon him, and the Father speaks over him, saying, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I'm well pleased." In the transfiguration, the cloud surrounds Jesus and the disciples, and the Father again speaks, saying, "This is my Son, listen to him." And it's a reaffirmation that Jesus is more than just a human Messiah, but he is God who has come among us to accomplish his mission on the earth. At his baptism, it was the unveiling of Jesus as he enters his public life. On the Mount of Transfiguration, on the threshold of Passover, it's about the mission of God. And the mission of God requires a death and a resurrection. And that's what the disciples aren't getting their heads around. That's what they're struggling with, is that Jesus has revealed himself as the Messiah. There's been this glory. And in their minds, what will be happening is when God's glory is revealed, Elijah will go ahead into Jerusalem, make the way open, and Jesus will then sit as a king in Jerusalem because God's glory has come. But Jesus has said he needs to go to die. One of the commentators on this, a guy called, I can't remember his first name, Evans, says the transfiguration serves this purpose. It is intended to reassure Mark's readers that the necessity of Jesus' death does not result from a withdrawal of heavenly favor. Jesus' mission and purpose have not been compromised. God is just as much with Jesus after the announcement of his passion as he was after his baptism. And he still claims Jesus as his unique Son. And so part of this is affirming to the disciples what is happening next doesn't mean Jesus has lost favor or something has gone wrong, but this is all part of God's plan, and what will result is a prefiguring of what will happen for us in our resurrection. That Jesus will go and be ascended and he will return to glory, and when he comes, he will come in glory and we will participate in that. But as they now go down the mountain, having been up the mountain, having seen Jesus' glory, they encounter a slightly different situation. And this kind of happens to us all. You're on this mountaintop experience with God, and as you come down, real life hits, and it hits with an argument. So let's pick up in verse 14. When they came to the disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and scribes disputing with them. When the whole crowd saw him, that's Jesus, they were amazed, and they ran to greet him. He asked them, "What are you arguing with them about?" Someone from the crowd answered, "Teacher, I brought my son to you. He has a spirit that makes him unable to speak. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams at the mouth, grinds his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive it out, but they couldn't." He replied to them, "You unbelieving generation, how long will I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring him to me." So they brought the boy to him. And when the spirit saw him, it immediately threw the boy into convulsions. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. How long has this been happening to him? Jesus asked his father. From childhood, he said. And many times it has thrown him into the fire or water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Jesus said to him, if you can, everything is possible for the one who believes. Immediately, the father of the boy cried out, I do believe, help my unbelief. And when Jesus saw that a crowd was quickly gathering, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, you mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. Then it came out shrieking and throwing him into terrible convulsions. The boy became like a corpse, so that many said, he is dead. But Jesus, taking him by the hand, raised him, and he stood up. After he had gone into the house, his disciples asked him privately, why couldn't we drive it out? He told them, this kind can come out by nothing but prayer. And this morning I want to talk about a call to believe in the mission of God. Jesus, with James, John, and Peter, have been up the mountain. They've seen the glory. They've seen the transfiguration. And as they come down, they see the disciples engaged in an argument and in a debate with some of the scribes. Mark doesn't tell us why the crowd are amazed, but they are amazed when they see Jesus. So there might be some residue, a bit like Moses as he comes down, a residue of God's glory on Jesus' face. But the crowd are amazed, but that amazement soon changes. It's interrupted as Jesus sees the commotion and the argument going on, and Jesus interjects and asks, what are you fighting about? What's this argument going on for? And it turns out the disciples who have been commissioned by Jesus and sent by Jesus, they've been told to go around healing the sick, casting out demons, preaching the gospel. That's been what they've been sent out in the Gospel of Mark to do, and they've been doing it successfully. No hindrance, no interruption. They've been doing well. But in this moment, as Jesus has been up the mountain, they've been unable to do it. Something has happened. Something has gone wrong. And they are struggling because now they can't do it. And the point is, these disciples now need to grow. Jesus has talked to them about his mission. And this is a moment where Jesus is allowing this to happen so that they will grow. N.T. Wright puts it like this. The main impression we get of the disciples' inability to deal with the problem and the crowd's consequent impatience with them is that they have turned a corner in their pilgrimage. Now it is getting harder. People today often suppose that the early years of a person's Christian pilgrimage are the difficult ones, and that as you go on in the Christian life, it gets more straightforward. The opposite is frequently the case. Precisely when you learn to walk beside Jesus, you are given harder tasks, which will demand more courage, more spiritual energy. Did we suppose that following Jesus was like a summer holiday? Isn't that the reality, church? The longer you're following Jesus, the more you come to understand of who he is, the more you come to understand of his mission, the more you come to understand the cost of discipleship, that when Jesus says to deny yourself, to take up your cross and to follow me, that the longer you go and the more you come to know, the harder that becomes. And that's a reality that you've got to know as a disciple, and often it will become harder as you seek to walk with Jesus. The more things you become aware of, and the more of Jesus you become aware of, and that we are seeking to become like, it can become more difficult. And that's part of the challenge of being a disciple. That's part of the challenge of following Jesus, because we still have these desires within that want to do something else, and we have to crucify them and choose to walk after Jesus. And the more you know, the harder it can be. And that's what's going on for these disciples. They need to take a step up in their understanding. They need to take a step up in their faith. They need to take a step up in understanding the mission of God. And so Jesus' response can sound quite harsh or quite frustrated when he says you unbelieving or you faithless generation, how long will I be with you? But Jesus is really saying what's going on so that we understand what's actually happening here. Jesus has unveiled to the disciples that he will die and that he will rise, and that is his mission. And Peter tried to stop it, got told off, and got told, Satan, get behind me, because he didn't really get what was going on. And this is a moment of a call to step up. This is a moment of a call to believe who Jesus is and the mission that he has to do. And so Jesus then turns and he speaks to this boy's father about what's happening. And he gets this conversation with the father so that he understands everything that's going on. And as you read it, you probably think he gets a longer appointment than you would at your local GP. But Jesus gets to talk to the father, and he understands everything that's happening. And so the father, in his desperation, says to Jesus, listen, if you can do anything, have compassion and do it. And Jesus corrects that and says, if I can. And that's part of this narrative. It's lifting our eyes from just a human level to who Jesus is. We have seen him transfigured. We have seen his godness radiate out. We've seen him on the mountain surrounded by glory. And so there isn't a question of if Jesus can do anything. And so Jesus poses the question, if I can. And it's a challenge not just to the Father, but to the disciples and to us as readers. When Jesus is involved, there's more than an if chance. That should at least have an amen. When Jesus is involved in our lives, there's more than an if going on. Jesus is the sovereign God. He doesn't just appear in the New Testament. He's the one who was with Moses on the mountain, and Moses was reflecting his glory. He was the one who spoke to Abraham. He was the one who was involved in the tabernacle being filled with God's glory, because he's always been God. And so it's not a case of if. Jesus wants them to put two and two together and realize he's the one who delivered Israel out of Egypt. He's the one who healed their diseases. He's the one who set them free. He's the one who provided for all of their needs. And so this scene is moving us from an if to an I know or an I do. When Jesus says, if you can, everything is possible to the one who believes. He's calling us to believe in who he is. He's calling us to believe that God can do anything, that there is nothing impossible for the one who is sovereign over all things. And as we read the statement, I do believe, help my unbelief. Do you remember the story of the blind man who Jesus healed twice? That's the background to this whole series of passages. That's the background which helps us to know what's going on here. That Jesus heals him the first time, and he sees men like trees walking around. And Jesus prays for him the second time, and he sees everything clearly. And that's what's going on with the disciples. They're seeing a little bit of who Jesus is, and they will see clearly at his death and resurrection. But this is part of the journey. And so they're seeing a little bit, even though they've seen a lot in his transfiguration. And so it becomes a prayer, not just of this man, but for the disciples. I do believe, help me to fully understand. Help me to get this. Help me to understand who you are. And then Jesus states that everything is impossible for the one who believes. What does that mean? Jesus asserts that since he acts in God's authority, he can do everything. Jesus asserts that he believes in the one who holds all power, and that all sufficiency of his faith as the Son gives him the ability to do all things. And Jesus asks the Father to surrender his skepticism, prompted by a seemingly hopeless situation, and to believe that he, Jesus, has the ability to do all things. And this morning, that might be a challenge for you to believe that Jesus can do all things, but that's what's written as a challenge for us as disciples. That we trust him to do all things in our lives. We trust him to do whatever he wills in our lives, because he has the power to do whatever he wants. He has the power to do whatever he wills. And we can often find ourselves in this same position as the Father, going, I do believe, help my unbelief. Help me to understand more. We're sort of believing and sort of unsure. That's faith as a mustard seed. But the phrase everything is possible should remind us of the power of God at work. Now, he alone is almighty. That when everything around us is powerless for us, it's out of our control, it's not beyond his control. He is still sovereign over it all. And this is a call of belief or of faith in Jesus as God and in his mission, which his mission ultimately is to put everything right. That everything that sin and the curse, all of the evil that came in the garden, all of the death, he is the one who is putting it right. He's the one who's dealing with it in his ministry. He's healing sick bodies. He's liberating people from unclean spirits. He's taking them away from the influence of evil. He's making things new. He's power over creation, and is pointing to his mission that God is ultimately restoring all things. He will make all things new, and that he will, in the new creation, restore all things to their proper order. And so it's a call to believe in him and his mission. And so Jesus rebukes the spirit and it leaves the boy. But as it does, we get another glimpse of Jesus' mission. Because I think sometimes we can read over things and not quite engage with what the text is telling us. But listen to what happens when the spirit leaves the boy, when he's delivered from this evil. It says, the boy became like a corpse, so that many said, he's dead. But Jesus, taking him by the hand, raised him, and he stood up. There's a death, and there's a raising up. There's what looks like a death, and there's a raising up. And it's really important because when Mark records the words, he raised him and he stood up, they're the two words that Mark uses to describe Jesus' resurrection 3 days after his death. And in this incident where the disciples seem powerless to do anything, we see, even in the way Jesus delivers this boy, the influence of the cross and the resurrection. He looked dead, and Jesus raised him up. That's his mission. How is Jesus going to accomplish setting people free from evil, healing, bringing the gift of God of salvation, bringing the nations to himself? How is Jesus going to do that? Through death and resurrection. The kingdom, our salvation, God's saving project that deals with sin, the curse, evil, all that entered through the garden is through his death and his resurrection. And that's why there's only one way of salvation, because there's only one way to fix it, and Jesus has accomplished it. There's only one way for humanity to be transformed. There's only one way for us to receive salvation, and that's through the cross and the resurrection of Jesus. There is no other way. And yet many will reject that because either it looks weak or it defies logic and it doesn't make sense to them. But the reality is Jesus, in dying on the cross, takes sin upon himself, evil upon himself, death upon himself, judgment upon himself, to nail it to the cross and to rise again, showing his innocence, and that new creation has started. And so the mission of God to accomplish it requires death and resurrection. And so to believe in Jesus is to believe in his mission, to believe in his works. And to not believe in his work is to not believe in Jesus. Can I gently but forcefully say, if you say you believe in Jesus, but you don't believe in his death and resurrection, you don't believe in Jesus. They come as a package. That's what Mark's putting together here. He's saying you can't have one without the other. And so this is a call to believe in his mission. Why couldn't the disciples deliver him I think Jesus set that up deliberately to show this is a moment to push into the mission of God. There's something new for them to believe, and that he is a Messiah who has come to be betrayed, to suffer, to die, and to be raised again on the third day. The mission of God can't happen without a death and a resurrection. That's why they're hindered from being able to deliver him. Jesus is making this point that the mission of God requires this, and without it, nothing will change. And when the disciples ask him privately, Jesus tells them that this kind can come out by nothing but prayer. He's teaching them a lesson. It's a lesson on being dependent on him as God, who is sovereign and can do all things, and believing that it's his mission to do these things. And when he says it can come out but nothing but prayer, prayer to who? To him. He's just unveiled himself to Peter, James, and John as God. And so, church, here's a reality for us. Believing and participating in the mission of God needs us to be a people of prayer. Because the mission of God goes forth through people of prayer. We can't divorce the mission of God of trying to proclaim his good news and show his works and do all that the kingdom does without equally being people who are dependent on him in prayer. If we are to see the mission of God advance in Crawley and these surrounding areas, we've got to be people of prayer, dependent on him. And here's the reality. Want to know how committed we are to God's mission? Check our prayer diary. Check what we're praying about. Check how often we're praying about it. Because like those disciples, we can do nothing without Jesus at work within us. So we need to believe in his mission. We need to be committed to his mission. We need to pray into his mission. And so this leads to Jesus' second prediction. Let's read from verse 30. Then they left that place and they made their way through Galilee. But he did not want anyone to know it. For he was teaching his disciples and telling them, the Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of men. They will kill him. After he is killed, he will rise 3 days later. But they did not understand this statement, and they were afraid to ask. Ever been that person in class where the teacher said something for the second time, and you still don't get it? And I'm not putting my hand up because I'm not going to be the one who looks stupid in this class. That's kind of where the disciples are up to. Jesus has said the same thing, a little bit more basic, when he says, I'm going to die, and after he's been killed, the Son of Man will be killed, and after he's been killed for 3 days, then he'll be raised. It's a little bit more basic than the last one, but Jesus is re-emphasizing this. He's keeping a low profile. He's just dealing with his disciples. He's teaching them as they will follow him faithfully. But he's telling them a second time, listen, this mission means I will be killed. And I'm going to be dead 3 days, and then I'm going to rise again. That's what it takes to bring about this mission. All of the stuff I've been teaching on the kingdom of God, all of the stuff I've been revealing through my miracles, all the stuff I've been revealing through deliverance and through healing, all the stuff that I've been showing you, it all culminates in the cross, and it all requires the cross to bring it about. And if you're not yet a Christian in here, if you're not yet a believer, then the cross is the only way of salvation. Through the cross of Jesus, he takes sin, he takes evil, he takes death, he takes judgment, he takes it on himself, and he makes you new if you will believe in him. And that's what he's calling these people to do. So Jesus is making it as basic for them as they possibly can, but they still don't grasp it. And here's the reality. It will be really hard to grasp Let's put ourselves back 2,000 years. Let's put ourselves back before Jesus has been crucified. And we've never gathered on Sunday mornings to celebrate anybody who's been raised from the dead. We've never heard of anybody being raised from the dead. And Jesus comes along and says, I'm going to die, and then I'm going to be raised up 3 days later. We all would understand what death is, and all of us would understand that when a person dies, they don't come back. We would all have that bit. And so to hear, and I will come back, would boggle all of our minds. We wouldn't have the capacity to comprehend it. It's like trying to work your way through Elim's finance figures at conference. I look at them and I just can't understand anything that they're telling me. It's like Martin trying to do engineering. He looks at the plans and just doesn't know what's going on. But here's the reality. It's the way of discipleship. It's how we come to understand. And as we do come to understand, as the penny drops on our walk with Jesus, then the requirement is we accept and we follow him. Some things are difficult for us to grasp. Peter, writing out Paul's letters, says, listen, Paul writes some things that are really hard to understand. There's just some things which are difficult. They are hard to grasp. One of them is right here in the text. How can God use evil events, betrayal, lies, deception, murder of his own son without him himself doing evil or ordaining sin to bring about good and salvation? So that God in no way sins or ordains evil, but he uses it in order to bring about salvation. That's a really complex, hard thing to get your minds around, but it's a reality. And you don't have to understand all of that in order to be saved. You just got to understand Jesus died for me, taking my place so that I would have new life. And so there is a bit of a faith journey for all of us as disciples. And it reminds us, Jesus didn't just turn up to his disciples and then impart all the knowledge he was going to give them in one go. Just like with children, they grow and they gradually pick up language, and then they learn to write simple letters, and then they learn to form them into sentences, and then they learn grammar and all of the stuff that surrounds it. There is stages in which they learn that, and that's how it is for us as disciples. Jesus didn't just plug in all the knowledge they ever needed. They were in a growing process. Peter is still learning in Acts chapter 10, after Jesus has already declared all foods clean. Peter's still grasping that when he preaches the gospel to these Gentiles, it's okay. God has made them clean. And in Galatians, when Paul has to tell him off because he was eating with Gentiles, and then Jews came along, and Peter moved himself just to be with the Jews and didn't interact with the Gentiles, again, Paul had to tell him off. Peter was still learning. And church, we're all still growing. We're all still learning. We're all still on that journey. And it is a slow journey. All of us are learning bits at a time. But as we learn, the call is for us to accept and to conform to the image of Jesus. And so, church, this passage is a call to believe in the mission of God, because Jesus has come, Messiah and God the Son. And so we are called to believe in his mission. Without believing in his mission, we cannot do his mission, and we cannot receive salvation. And this mission has to be soaked in prayer. To do this mission as a church and all of the things that we do, Trinity Tots, youth drop-in, tea and toast, community meals, Alpha, all of the things that we're doing, it all needs soaked in prayer for the mission to be effective. And like these disciples, it takes time for us to grow in our knowledge and in our understanding, for us to mature. But as we do, we must grow and follow him. And if you don't understand it not all now, chill. You will get there. Just keep going. Just keep letting God transform you. You will. But from this, take a quiet confidence that we get from Jesus, that everything is possible for the one who believes. Take a quiet confidence. If you don't understand anything else, take a quiet confidence. Jesus is God. He can do what he wants. And it's his power to do it. And if Jesus died and rose for you, for your salvation, then nothing else is impossible. Maybe we can just close our eyes for a moment, just bow our heads. If you're not yet a believer, if you're not yet a Christian, then this passage is a call for you to believe. See, you may believe your life, your situation, your sin, your mistakes are too big. You're too sick to be healed by Jesus. His words to you are, everything is impossible to the one who believes. And so come to Jesus. Ask him. And like this Father, he will change you. And you can ask Jesus into your life. You can commit to follow him in a simple prayer like this. So you can just pray along with me if you have come to see that you need Jesus this morning. If you just pray something simple like this: Lord Jesus, I want to know you. Thank you for dying on the cross for my sins. I receive you as my Savior and God. Thank you for forgiving me of my sins and giving me life. Transform me into the kind of person you made me to be. Amen. Now, if you've prayed that, then come and see me, because we would love to talk to you about your ongoing walk with Jesus, what it means to follow him, talk to you about baptism as you follow Jesus. And so let me know that you've prayed that. We'll give you a Bible. We'll talk to you about faith. We'll talk to you about baptism. And we'll help you to walk this journey.